he kicked wife and children away, unaware she owned the house. In a fit of arrogance, he kicked his wife and children out, yelling that they were nothing without him. Neighbors watched as she gathered their things, tears in her eyes, while he strutted like a king. What he didn't know was that the house he claimed as his throne legally belonged to her. This is the story of a man's pride, a woman's quiet power, and the twist that turned his triumph into humiliation. Hello family, welcome back. Before we begin, I have a small but heartfelt request. Please subscribe. Your support is what keeps these stories alive. Every time you click that button, you're helping us share voices that would otherwise be forgotten and stories that deserve to be heard. And in the comments, tell us where you're watching from, because together we are not just telling stories, we are keeping hope alive. On Maple Street, the Millers looked like the kind of family everyone envied. The neighbors saw James Miller every morning, tall, well-dressed, with a polished smile that seemed made for photographs. He would wave confidently while stepping into his sleek black car, calling out to whoever was nearby. "Good morning, Mrs. Howard. Lovely roses as always," he'd say, flashing his perfect teeth. Or, "Kids, stay in school. Hard work is the secret to success." People admired him. To them, James was a man who had it all: a big house, a beautiful wife, and 2 bright children. But what the neighbors saw was a carefully built mask. At family gatherings, James would boast openly, "This house? Every brick, every nail, it's all thanks to me. My business feeds us, my money keeps the lights on." He loved saying those words while resting his arm around his wife's shoulders, as if Sarah was nothing more than decoration beside his throne. Sarah smiled quietly whenever he spoke. Her soft brown eyes gave nothing away, but inside, she felt the sting every time he spoke of his house, his money, his sacrifices. She never corrected him, never told the truth, because peace mattered more than pride. The children, Emma and Daniel, both under 10, watched their father with wide eyes. To the world, he was the hero of the family, but to them, he was a storm. His voice could turn from sweet to sharp without warning, and they had learned to tiptoe when he was home. That evening, the mask slipped behind closed doors. The family sat down for dinner. The table was set with roasted chicken and mashed potatoes. Sarah's cooking, as always. James leaned back in his chair, scrolling through his phone with one hand while holding his fork in the other. "Did you hear?" he said suddenly, looking at Sarah without really looking at her. "Mark Jensen just bought his wife a brand new car, a Lexus. Can you imagine? That's what a man does when he makes real money." Provided Sarah kept her voice calm. "James, we have 2 cars. Both are working fine." He scoffed. "That's not the point, Sarah. You wouldn't understand. You don't make money, so how could you?" The words cut, but she said nothing. She focused on cutting Emma's chicken into smaller pieces, her hands steady, though her heart ached. Emma looked between her parents nervously. "Mommy makes us breakfast every day. That's important too, right, Daddy?" James's eyes flicked toward his daughter, and for a moment, his jaw tightened. Then he forced a smile. "Of course, Pumpkin. Mommy takes care of little things. But big things? That's Daddy's job." Sarah lowered her eyes. She had heard it all before. Later that night, after the children were asleep, James stood in the living room, adjusting his tie for a late business meeting. Sarah leaned against the doorway, watching him. "Another meeting this late?" she asked gently. He gave her a sharp look. "Do you want this family to eat? Do you want to live in this house? Then don't question me about meetings." Sarah swallowed her words. She wanted to ask why he smelled of cologne stronger than usual, or why business meetings required him to laugh on the phone with such softness in his voice. But she stayed quiet. She had learned that asking questions only led to arguments, When the door closed behind him, the house felt heavy and hollow. The truth came by accident a week later. Sarah was folding laundry in the bedroom when James's phone buzzed on the nightstand. He was in the shower, humming loudly, water running over his arrogance. She glanced at the screen. A message flashed. "Chloe, can't wait to see you tonight. Don't keep me waiting like last time," followed by a heart emoji. Sarah froze. Her fingers trembled as she unlocked the phone. The thread was long, filled with playful words and promises James had never whispered to her in years. "You make me feel alive, Chloe. I'll leave her soon. You deserve better than sharing me. This house will be ours one day." Her chest tightened, but she did not cry out. Instead, she carefully placed the phone back on the nightstand before James stepped out of the bathroom. "Hand me a towel, will you?" he called cheerfully, steam billowing from the door. Sarah's face was calm as she passed it to him. Her silence startled even herself. Inside, her heart bled, but her mind was already thinking of Emma and Daniel. She couldn't break down. Not yet. That night, she lay awake beside him, listening to his steady breathing. His arm was flung across her like a weight, but she no longer felt warmth in his touch. She thought of their children, of the home they believed was safe, and of the neighbors who praised James as the perfect man. And for the first time in years, Sarah felt something stronger than pain, a quiet resolve. She knew more than he thought she did, but for now, she kept the illusion alive. The next morning, the neighbors watched James step outside again, handsome in his crisp suit, waving like a king. Beside him, Sarah stood with the children, her face calm, her voice soft. "Bye, honey," she said, just as always. James grinned, climbing into his car. "Remember, everything you have is because of me." The neighbors smiled, nodding in admiration. But Sarah's lips curved in the faintest of smiles, one no one noticed. A secret smile. A smile that hinted at a truth James Miller would never see coming. If you haven't subscribed yet, I'd love you to join our community by hitting the subscribe button. Through our stories, we build hope and give future to children and women abused all over the world. Motivate us by subscribing to hitting the subscribe button and turning on your notification bell. Also let us know in the comments where you are watching us from and how this story hit home for you. The cracks in James Miller's mask were no longer hidden. What he once said in whispers behind closed doors, he now allowed to slip out in public, confident no one would dare question him. It began at a dinner party. The Millers were seated around the long oak table at their friend's home, the Carters, a wealthy couple James admired. The room glowed with laughter, wine glasses clinking, and plates filled with roasted lamb. James loved gatherings like these. They gave him a stage. "James, your house is beautiful," Mr. Carter remarked. "Every time we pass by, we admire the porch and that wide yard. Must feel good to build a home like that." James's chest swelled with pride. "Well, what can I say? I've worked hard. Blood, sweat, and sacrifice. That house, it's all because of me." He leaned back in his chair, resting an arm across Sarah's shoulders. To anyone else, it might have looked affectionate, but Sarah felt the weight like a chain. "Sarah here doesn't have to lift a finger," James continued, chuckling. "She's lucky. Most women nag their husbands about money, but mine, she just gets to enjoy the roof I provide." The laughter around the table faltered. Some smiled politely, others glanced at Sarah with discomfort. She lowered her eyes, her face calm, though her stomach churned. Mrs. Carter cleared her throat, offering Sarah a kind smile. "Well, keeping a home together is no small job either." "I'd say you're lucky to have her." James waved it off with a laugh. Sure. She cooks, she cleans. But let's be honest, without me, where would she be?" The words landed like blows, but Sarah didn't flinch. She pressed her fork gently into her food, her thoughts far from the table. because only she knew the truth. That night, long after the guests had gone and James had collapsed into bed with the smell of whiskey on his breath, Sarah sat quietly in the living room. She opened the drawer of an old cabinet and pulled out a worn envelope. Inside were papers she had kept hidden for years, the deed to the house. Her fingers brushed over the lines of her parents' names. Her late mother and father had worked their entire lives to leave her something secure. With their inheritance, Sarah had bought the house before she ever married James. But when James insisted it was his house, she let him believe it. She had wanted peace. She had wanted him to feel proud, to feel like a man. Now that choice felt like her punishment. Tears welled in her eyes, but she blinked them back. She couldn't afford weakness. Emma and, Daniel needed her steady, even when her heart cracked inside. She folded the papers carefully and tucked them away again. The weeks that followed grew darker. James no longer bothered to hide his disdain. One evening, as Sarah served dinner, he sneered at the plate. "Chicken again? You really can't be more creative." Emma spoke softly. "I like Mommy's chicken." James slammed his fork down, startling both children. "Don't talk back, Emma. Learn some respect." Sarah reached for her daughter's hand under the table, squeezing it gently. She whispered, "It's okay, sweetheart." But inside, Sarah's heart burned. James's arrogance spilled outside their home too. Chloe, the woman Sarah had discovered through his phone, began appearing in small ways. At first, it was little things. James suddenly smelling of a perfume Sarah didn't wear, or neighbors mentioning they'd seen him around town with a business associate. Then it grew bolder. At a neighborhood barbecue, James showed up late, Chloe at his side. She was younger, with bright red lipstick and a laugh that drew attention. "This is Chloe," James introduced casually, his hand resting a little too comfortably on her back. "She's helping me with some projects." The neighbors exchanged uneasy glances. Some smiled tightly, others looked away. Sarah stood there with Emma and Daniel beside her, her face calm, her voice steady, as she greeted Chloe politely. But inside, her heart screamed. Later, when the neighbors whispered in hushed tones, no one came to Sarah's defense. They saw, they knew, but they stayed quiet. People rarely interfered in other people's marriages, even when betrayal was plain as day. That silence was its own kind of cruelty. At night, James grew more reckless. He'd stumble in smelling of alcohol and perfume, sometimes not bothering to come home at all. One night, as he slipped through the door at nearly dawn, Sarah finally spoke. "James," she said softly from the couch, where she'd been waiting. "This isn't right. The children notice when you're gone." He froze for a moment, then laughed coldly. "The children notice? What about me? Do you notice what I do? The sacrifices I make for this family? I deserve some fun. Don't stand there pretending you understand my life." "I'm your wife," Sarah whispered. "I should understand more than anyone." He turned on her then, eyes sharp. "You're my wife because I let you be. Don't forget, Sarah. You'd have nothing without me. Nothing." He stormed upstairs, leaving her in the dark. Her body shook, not with fear, but with rage she swallowed back. She thought of Emma's innocent question the week before. "Mommy, why is Daddy always angry?" Sarah had no answer then, but she was beginning to find one now. What James didn't know was that his arrogance was leading him toward his downfall. Over late-night drinks with Chloe, he began plotting. "She's holding me back," James muttered, his words slurred but his intent sharp. "Sarah's boring. Weak, I've carried her long enough." Chloe leaned in, her voice smooth. "Then leave her, James. Why waste time with someone who doesn't make you happy?" James smirked. "I will. I just need to make sure the house is secure first. Once I get rid of Sarah, you and I will run everything. That house will be ours, and then I'll sell it, make real money, start something bigger." She'll be out with nothing. Chloe smiled, clinking her glass against his. That's my man. He believed every word. He believed the house was his to sell, his throne to do with as he pleased. And that belief was his blind spot. Because Sarah, quiet, graceful, enduring Sarah, knew the truth. And she was no longer the woman who would remain silent forever. The illusion of the perfect family was collapsing. The neighbors who once admired James now whispered behind curtains. Emma and Daniel grew quieter, watching their mother with confused eyes, sensing more than they understood. And Sarah, sitting in the stillness of her room, folded her hands together and whispered to herself, "Not much longer." James's pride was building like a storm, reckless and unstoppable. But storms always crash. And when his did, the fall would be harder than he could ever imagine. The morning began like any other. Sarah stood in the kitchen, preparing breakfast for Emma and Daniel. Scrambled eggs, toast, and orange juice. The children chattered softly, trying to keep the mood light, though the air in the Miller home had been heavy for weeks. Then James walked in. His suit was crisp, his cologne strong, his smile thin and sharp. "Coffee," he said flatly, not even glancing at Sarah. She poured it quietly and set it on the table. He took a sip, then set the cup down with a clink. "You know, Sarah, I've been thinking. I'm sick of this routine. I'm sick of coming home to a woman who contributes nothing." Emma's small voice broke in. "Daddy?" "Be quiet," James snapped, his tone cutting. The little girl shrank back, and Sarah's hand instinctively moved to comfort her. Sarah's voice was calm. "James, the children are here. Don't what?" He cut her off, his voice rising. "Don't tell the truth." "That's the problem with you, Sarah. You hide behind these kids, behind your quiet little smile, but you've given me nothing. Everything we have is because of me. You hear me? Me." His voice grew louder, echoing through the house. Neighbors, already used to the sounds of his temper, began peeking through windows and stepping onto porches. "You're a burden, Sarah!" James roared, pointing at her with shaking hands. "You've been dead." "Wait from the beginning. Without me, you'd be nothing. Nothing but a sad little woman with no money and no future." Emma and Daniel began crying, their small bodies trembling. Sarah pulled them close, her own heart breaking, but her face remained steady. James's rage boiled over. He yanked open the front door and shouted, "Get out! Get out of my house! Take your whining and your uselessness and leave. You and the kids, you're nothing without me." The words sliced through the air like knives. Sarah stood there holding her children. Neighbors gathered in silence, watching the scene unfold. James's chest heaved as he stood in the doorway, a king throwing his family to the streets. Tears streamed down Emma's cheeks. "Mommy, please." Sarah knelt, brushing the tears away with steady hands. "It's okay, sweetheart. Mommy's here. We'll be okay." Then she stood, lifted her chin, and began walking down the porch steps with her children at her side. She carried nothing but their backpacks. She did not look back. The neighbors whispered as she passed. Some shook their heads, others gasped, but no one intervened. And James, standing tall in the doorway, smirked as though he had won. Within days, James's world looked exactly as he had wanted. Chloe moved in, her laughter echoing through the halls. She decorated the house with her things, bright throw pillows, wine bottles, perfume bottles scattered on dressers. James paraded her around town, introducing her as though she were a prize. The neighbors, though disturbed, kept their silence. Some turned away when they saw James and Chloe together. Others gossiped quietly, pitying Sarah. But James thrived on the attention. One Friday night, he hosted a party at the house. Music blared, glasses of champagne clinked, and Chloe floated around in a red dress, glued to his side. "To freedom!" James announced, raising his glass as guests cheered. "No more dead weight. No more anchors holding me down. Now it's just me, Chloe, and a future full of success. He strutted through the rooms like a conqueror, showing off his house as if it were a trophy. Look at this place. Paid for by my sweat. Every inch of it screams success. Chloe laughed and kissed his cheek. You deserve it, baby. But in the corners of the room, some guests whispered. They had seen Sarah walking her children to school, her dignity intact despite her humiliation. They had noticed how neighbors had grown colder toward James. They knew arrogance when they saw it. Still, James drank, laughed, and celebrated, blind to the shifting winds around him. One afternoon, as Sarah picked Emma and Daniel up from school, a familiar voice called out, "Sarah!" She turned to see Linda, her longtime friend, walking quickly toward her. Linda's eyes were full of concern. "Can we talk?" she asked quietly, glancing at the children. Sarah nodded, and they stepped aside. "James is planning something," Linda whispered. "I overheard him bragging to some men at the bar. He's talking about selling the house. He says he's going to use the money to start some luxury venture with that woman." Sarah's chest tightened. "Selling the house?" Linda nodded. "He thinks it's his. He told them once he gets rid of you officially, he'll cash out big and leave you with nothing. I thought you should know before—" She hesitated, her voice breaking. "Before it's too late." Sarah's breath was steady, but her eyes sharpened. "Thank you, Linda." Linda squeezed her hand. "Be careful. He's reckless, Sarah. He's not the man he used to be." Sarah nodded again. She wasn't surprised. James's pride had been leading to this moment. But now, she knew it was time. That night, when Emma and Daniel were asleep, Sarah sat alone at the small apartment she had rented temporarily. She pulled out the deed again, her hands steady as she studied the proof of what she had always known. The house was hers. Her lips pressed into a thin line. James believed she was powerless. He believed he could erase her with a signature. But he had forgotten something vital. Quiet does not mean weak. Sarah picked up her phone and dialed. "Mr. Grant? It's Sarah Miller. I need to meet with you. It's about my house." Her lawyer's voice was calm. "Of course. Bring the documents. We'll take care of this." Sarah ended the call, her chest rising with a deep breath. For the first time in years, she felt power stirring inside her. She had been humiliated. She had been thrown out. She had been broken. But she was not destroyed. James thought he had won. He had no idea the ground he stood on was about to crumble beneath his feet. The Miller house stood tall that Saturday afternoon, but its walls carried whispers of scandal. Neighbors gathered across the street, curiosity pulling them like moths to a flame. Word had spread quickly. James Miller was about to sell his house for millions, and he was throwing a celebration to mark his new beginning. The driveway was crowded with expensive cars, music spilling from the open windows. Inside, laughter and clinking glasses filled the rooms. James, dressed in a sharp navy suit, strutted through the house with Chloe at his side, her red dress sparkling under the lights. "Today is the start of a new chapter," James declared, raising his glass of champagne high. "I've worked too hard, sacrificed too much to be dragged down. Now I'm free. And soon, when this deal closes, I'll have more than any man in this town." The guests cheered, though some exchanged uneasy glances. They remembered the day he had thrown Sarah and the children out onto the street. They remembered the tears in her eyes, the way she had walked away with dignity while James laughed. Now, that image clung to their minds as they watched him boast. James led the crowd toward the dining room, where a sleek man in a tailored suit sat with a leather briefcase. The buyer, the contract, the deal. "This," James said proudly, patting the table where papers lay ready, "is the future. Millions in my account, a luxury venture with Chloe, and nothing to hold me back. This house, my house, will be the crown jewel of my success." He puffed out his chest, his voice carrying over the crowd. You all know I built this life from nothing. Every inch of this house is mine. And now, it's about to pay off big." The room buzzed with excitement, but just as James reached for the pen, the front door creaked open. All heads turned. There, in the doorway, stood Sarah. She wasn't dressed for drama. No flashy clothes, no makeup meant to impress. She wore a simple navy dress, her hair tied back neatly, her eyes calm and clear. At her side stood Mr. Grant, her lawyer, carrying a thick folder. The room fell silent. Chloe's smile faltered. James's hand froze above the contract. "Sarah!" he spat, trying to recover. "What are you doing here? You have no place in this house anymore." Sarah's voice was steady. "That's where you're wrong, James." A ripple of whispers swept through the guests. Sarah walked forward slowly, her heels clicking against the floor. She placed a hand on the back of a chair, her calmness unnerving against James's rising fury. "You've told everyone this house is yours," she said, her voice carrying through the room. "You've humiliated me in front of neighbors, thrown your children out, and brought another woman under this roof." She paused, her eyes steady on him. "But James, you never owned this house." Gasps filled the air. Chloe's head whipped toward James. "What is she talking about?" Chloe hissed. James forced a laugh, though sweat beaded on his forehead. "She's delusional. She's trying to ruin my moment." Sarah nodded to Mr. Grant. The lawyer stepped forward and placed the folder on the table, sliding out a stack of papers. "This," Mr. Grant announced, "is the legal deed to the property at 112 Maple Street. It is registered under the name Sarah Miller, purchased in full before her marriage, with funds inherited from her late parents." He held the papers up for all to see, the official stamps and signatures clear. "She is the sole legal owner of this house," Mr. Grant continued. "James Miller has no claim to it whatsoever." The room erupted in shocked murmurs. Chloe's face turned pale. You told me this house was yours, James." James's composure cracked. "No, this is a mistake. I've lived here for years. I paid the bills. It's mine." Sarah's voice cut through his protests. "You paid bills, yes. But the house? It was always mine. I let you believe it was yours because I wanted peace. I wanted you to feel like a provider. But you crossed the line when you betrayed me, when you humiliated me, when you threw me and our children into the street." Her eyes sharpened, her voice rising for the first time. "You called us nothing, James. But today, you are the one with nothing." The guests gasped again, some covering their mouths, others shaking their heads. The same neighbors who once admired James now whispered in scorn. "Arrogant fool," someone muttered. "He treated her like dirt," another whispered. Chloe's face twisted in disgust. She stepped away from James, her voice dripping with disdain. "You lied to me. You don't own this place. You don't have millions. You're a joke." She snatched her purse and stormed toward the door. "I'm not wasting my life on a man with nothing." "Chloe, wait!" James shouted, reaching after her. But she was gone, the door slamming behind her like the closing of his last escape. Laughter broke out in the crowd. Not kind laughter, but sharp and mocking. James's face flushed red as he spun towards Sarah, his eyes wild. "You ruined me!" he screamed. "You planned this!" Sarah stood tall, her children now at her side, having been brought in quietly by a kind neighbor. Emma and Daniel clung to her hands, their eyes wide, but their hearts swelling with pride. "No, James," Sarah said firmly. "You ruined yourself. Your pride, your arrogance, your betrayal. They led you here. I gave you a home, I gave you a family, I gave you grace, and you destroyed it all." Tears stung James's eyes, but it was too late. He looked around desperately, but all he saw were faces twisted in judgment, neighbors who had once admired him now shaking their heads. "Get out," Sarah said, her voice calm but final. "This is my house." You no longer live here." James's mouth opened, but no words came. His body trembled with fury, humiliation, and disbelief. Slowly, step by step, he stumbled toward the door, the crowd parting to let him through. Outside, he stood alone on the porch, the autumn air biting against his skin. Behind him, the door closed with a heavy finality. And just like that, the man who once believed he owned everything was left with nothing. Not a house, not a family, not even dignity. Inside, Sarah knelt beside her children, pulling them into her arms. "We're home," she whispered, her tears finally falling, not of pain, but of relief. The neighbors who had once pitied her now looked at her with admiration. They saw her strength, her patience, her quiet victory. Emma pressed her face into her mother's shoulder. "Mommy, are we safe now?" Sarah kissed her daughter's hair. "Yes, baby. We're safe. This is our home." And for the first time in a long time, Sarah felt truly free. That night, as she tucked Emma and Daniel into bed, Sarah stood at the doorway of their room, watching them drift into peaceful sleep. The weight of the past months lifted from her shoulders. She whispered softly to herself, "Pride destroys. Betrayal blinds. But truth, truth always wins." The house was quiet again, but this time it wasn't a silence of fear. It was the silence of peace. James's pride had been his crown, and in the end, that crown had shattered, leaving him exposed before everyone. Sarah closed the front door and locked it, not in fear, but in triumph. The home that had once been her prison was now her victory. And James Miller? He stood in the shadows of Maple Street, a broken man with no kingdom, watching the lights of the house he had lost glow warmly without him. Pride and betrayal destroy even the strongest-looking man, but quiet strength and patience can turn humiliation into justice.